A father never used an alarm clock. Every day, exactly at 4 a.m., he would gently knock on his son's door. No scolding. No forcing, just a familiar line. Wake up. The new day has begun. The boy hated it. While his friends were still fast asleep, he had to sit at his desk, eyes heavy with sleepiness. He once thought it was unreasonable strictness, but many years later, that very habit he once resented became the thing that changed his entire life. He was born into a family that had nothing but long, struggling days. His father worked as a laborer in a small mechanical workshop, while his mother sold goods at the market from early morning until late at night. The money they earned was just enough to get by, with almost nothing left over. Their small house was tucked deep inside a damp alley. During the rainy season, water would flood right up to the doorstep. In the dry season, the heat became suffocating. He grew up with simple meals, sometimes just vegetables and a bit of fish sauce. But what he remembered most was not the poverty, but the way his parents lived. His father almost never rested, no matter how exhausted he was. The next morning, he would still wake up on time, prepare everything, and go to work. He spoke little, but every action reflected a cold, unwavering discipline. His mother was different. She never forced or lectured him. She simply worked quietly, day after day, without a single complaint. He watched them every day, but at that time, he didn't think it was anything special. To him, it was just a life he always wanted to escape from. Those 4 a.m. mornings continued, day after day, in the same steady rhythm. At first, he followed the routine out of fear of his father, but over time, the exhaustion turned into frustration, and then into a quiet question that lingered in his mind. Why am I trying so hard? He looked at his father, a man who had worked tirelessly for more than 20 years, yet still lived in that cramped house. He looked at his mother, her hands rough, her back slowly bending from years of carrying goods. They had never stopped, never been lazy, yet their life seemed unchanged. One evening, after finishing his studies, he sat alone by the window. Outside, the dim yellow streetlight cast a faint glow over the quiet alley. He sighed and whispered, as if speaking to himself, "If hard work is enough, then why is my family still poor?" There was no answer. His father remained silent. As always, his mother continued her work, but from that moment on, something inside him began to change. He no longer followed the routine blindly. He started observing more how his father worked, how his mother sold goods, how people around him lived, and for the first time, he realized something. Hard work is the foundation, but perhaps it is not everything. That thought would not let him rest. It pushed him to search for a different path, a way to turn his efforts into something greater. And then, on a morning much like any other, when his father knocked on the door, he opened his eyes. But this time, there was no irritation in his mind. There was a decision. A few weeks later, he began to take action. At first, the changes were very small. After school, instead of going straight home, he asked for a part-time job at a motorbike repair shop near his school. The work was not pleasant. His hands were always covered in grease. His clothes smelled of gasoline. And by the time he got home in the evening, he was too exhausted to talk to anyone. But there, he learned things that school never taught. He observed how the shop owner spoke to customers, how he calculated prices, how he kept people coming back. He realized that some people worked less but earned more, not because they were lazy, but because they understood how work truly operated. That old thought returned, but this time it was clearer. It's not enough to just work hard. You have to work smart. He began to change the way he studied. The 4 a.m. mornings remained, but they were no longer just about memorizing lessons. He started learning about business, about making money, about things he had never thought of before. There were days when he felt completely drained, times when he wanted to give up and return to the simple life he once had. But whenever that happened, he would think of his father still waking up early, every single day, never once complaining. And he understood something. The discipline his father had forced on him since childhood was not meant for him to live the same life. It was meant to give him the strength to go further. One evening, as he was wiping his hands after work, the shop owner looked at him and asked, "You don't plan to stay here your whole life, do you?" He remained silent. The owner smiled lightly. "If you only work hard, you'll end up like me. But if you know how to use what you learn, you can go much further." That sentence hit him deeply. That night, for the first time, he didn't just think about escaping his current life. He began to think about the kind of life he wanted to build. Opportunity came to him in a very ordinary way, so ordinary that, if he hadn't paid attention, he might have missed it. One day, the shop owner asked him to record the weekly wages and expenses. Just a few simple numbers. But when he looked at the old notebook, he realized everything was messy. Money coming in, money going out. Nothing was clear. There were even losses that the owner himself hadn't noticed. That night, he took the notebook home. At 4 a.m. the next morning, instead of studying as usual, he sat down and tried to reorganize everything. He divided each category, rewrote the records more clearly, and recalculated the profits. When he handed it back, the owner stayed silent for a long time. "You did this?" he asked. The boy nodded. Slightly nervous, the owner said nothing more. He simply placed the notebook down and looked at him with eyes that were completely different from before. From that day on, he was no longer just an assistant. He began to be given more responsibilities, managing money, handling inventory, even suggesting ways to improve the business. Everything he had quietly learned, those 4 a.m. mornings, the exhausting work days, all of it started to connect. He didn't realize it at first, but things were changing. Not loudly, not suddenly, just step by step. His life began to turn in a different direction. The change didn't come instantly, but it was clear enough for him to feel it. Within just a few months, the repair shop began to transform. More customers returned. The finances were better organized, and the work ran more smoothly than before. The owner didn't say much, but gradually, he entrusted the boy with almost all the management responsibilities. One afternoon, when the shop was quiet, the owner called him over. "Do you know why I trust you?" he asked. The boy shook his head. "It's not because you're the smartest. It's because you're the only one here who always shows up on time, finishes what you start, and never leaves things halfway." He stood still. For the first time, he truly understood the value of those 4 a.m. mornings. It wasn't about waking up early. It was about showing up, no matter what. A week later, the owner made an offer he had never imagined. I'm getting old. I can't do this forever. If you want, I can let you manage this place long term. Maybe even one day. It could be yours?" He didn't answer right away. In his mind, the image of his father appeared, still waking up early, every day, still working tirelessly. But this time, it no longer felt like a meaningless cycle. He understood. This was the moment when everything began to bloom. He accepted, not because he was certain he would succeed, but because he knew he was ready to try. In the days that followed, he worked with a completely different mindset. He was no longer just a worker, but someone who carried responsibility. Every decision, no matter how small, made him think more carefully. Every mistake, no matter how minor, made him reflect on how he could do better. He began to transform the repair shop. He reorganized the space, assigned tasks more clearly, and kept detailed records of every expense and every spare part. He learned how to talk to customers, not just to fix their bikes, but to build trust. At first, things didn't go smoothly. Some days, there were fewer customers than before. Some people doubted that a young boy like him could manage anything. There were times he made mistakes ordering the wrong items, miscalculating costs. But this time, he didn't give up. He remembered all the times he had failed before and understood that failure was not the end, but part of the journey. Little by little, things began to change. Customers started coming back more often. They didn't just come for repairs. They brought their friends along. The shop's name slowly became familiar in the neighborhood. One morning, as he opened the shop still at 4 a.m., like every other day, he suddenly realized something. Everything around him had changed, but his habit remained the same. And that, more than anything else, was what had brought him this far. Years passed, and that small repair shop was no longer just a place hidden in a narrow alley. He now, a grown man, opened a second branch, then a third. From repairing motorbikes, he expanded into supplying spare parts and offering professional maintenance services. Everything grew bigger, but the way he worked never changed. Still 4 a.m. Still, the first one to open the door. People often asked him, "You're already successful. Why do you still keep that habit?" He would just smile, because he knew what brought him to where he is today was not one big decision, but thousands of small mornings like that. One day, he returned to his old home. The alley was the same. The house was the same. His father was now old, no longer able to do heavy work. Yet that morning, at exactly 4 a.m., he still woke up just as he had done his whole life. The man stood at the doorway, watching him for a long moment. Then, for the first time in his life, he said, "I understand now." His father didn't ask anything. He simply nodded gently, as if he had been waiting for those words for a very long time. And in that moment, he realized everything he had built had actually begun long before that. From a door, gently knocked on every morning at 4 a.m. But his story didn't end there. From those small repair shops, he began to think further ahead. He realized that the market didn't just need repairs, it needed professional, trustworthy service. Something very few places could truly offer. He invested in training mechanics, built systems, standardized workflows, things that, until then, no one in the trade really cared about. Many people thought he was overdoing it. "It's just bike repair. Why make it so complicated?" He didn't argue. He simply kept going, step by step. His small shops began to stand out. Customers came not just for the price, but for peace of mind. His reputation spread. From a few branches, he built an entire system. Years later, his name was no longer tied to a narrow alley. It had become a brand. But if you ask him what mattered most in that journey, the answer would still be simple. Not the decision to expand, not business strategy, but the fact that every single day, he still woke up and started before the world did. If there is one thing this story leaves behind, it's not that you must wake up at 4 a.m. It's this: discipline is not something you are given. It's something you build every single day. You may not start from a good place. You may not have money, connections, or any clear advantages, but you always have one choice, whether you show up every day or not. The small things, repeated over time, sometimes boring, are what create the biggest difference. Because, in the end, success doesn't come from one special moment. It is built from very ordinary mornings.